You are nothing but a spiritless waste of space, Rhea, and you dare to demand my attention." Alpha Ryker's voice didn't just boom across the Solstice Ballroom, it shattered me. My hand was still outstretched, trembling, the fingertips burning where I had foolishly tried to grab his arm. A reckless, desperate attempt to spark the mate bond he was ignoring in front of the entire court. I should have stayed in the shadows. I should have kept my head down. But I didn't. I forced his hand, and now he was going to break mine. Ivy, draped in red silk that cost more than my entire life's earnings, stepped closer, swirling her wineglass. "Oh, the poor little mute finally speaks," she sneered, tilting the glass until the crimson liquid poured over my head, soaking my only good dress. "Ryker, tell her."
"Tell her who you really chose." Ryker grabbed Ivy's waist, looking down at me like I was dirt on his boot. The music stopped. The room held its breath. "I reject you, Rhea," he spat, his golden eyes cold. "I choose strength. I choose Ivy. Guards, remove this trash from my sight." My heart stopped. The guards moved in, spears raised, and I realized my reckless demand for the truth had just signed my death warrant. Whoa, family, can you feel that tension already? That is just the beginning of the roller coaster we are hopping on today. Welcome back to Storm's Werewolf Romance Library. I am so happy to have you here with us. If this is your first time running with our pack, make sure you hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. We drop heater stories like this every single day, and you do not want to miss the next chapter.
And for my returning listeners, my true pack members, you know the drill. Smash that like button right now to help the algorithm find us. If you want to support the channel even more, consider joining our channel membership for exclusive perks and early access to these episodes. I want to hear from you today. Drop a comment down below telling me exactly where you're listening from, whether it's New York, Georgia, Canada, Cape Town, Lagos, or London. And as we go through the story, please timestamp your favorite emotional moments or the parts that made you gasp. I read every single comment, and I love seeing your reactions. Now, take a deep breath, because Rhea's story is about to get intense. Let's dive in. Chapter 1. The Solstice of Shattered Glass. The Winter Solstice Ball was less of a celebration and more of a hunting ground for the elite, a place where status was traded like currency and weakness was devoured before the appetizers were even served. I stood pressed against the furthest wall of the crystal hall, trying to make myself as small as physically possible. My grey dress, a hand-me-down from a servant who had passed away 3 winters ago, felt rough against my skin, a stark contrast to the flowing silks and velvets swirling around the dance floor. The air was heavy with the perfume of 100 wealthy wolves, a cloying mixture of rose water, musk, and the metallic tang of gold. But beneath it all, I could smell the sharp, predatory scent of judgment. They knew I didn't belong here. They knew I was only present because the law demanded every pack member attend the solstice, regardless of their station or lack thereof. I kept my gaze fixed on the polished marble tiles, counting the scuffs to keep my heart from hammering out of my chest. Tonight was the night. The fated mating moon hung high and full above the skylights, its silver beams illuminating the room with a spectral glow that made everyone look beautiful and dangerous. I felt the pull in my very marrow, a magnetic snap that told me my mate was close. My wolf, usually dormant and quiet, paced restlessly in the back of my mind, whining with an anticipation I couldn't suppress. I knew who it was. Every wolf in the pack knew who their alpha was. But for me, Alpha Ryker was more than just a leader. He was the only person who had ever looked at me without immediately sneering. I held on to that small memory, a fleeting glance from a training session years ago, like a lifeline. The heavy oak doors at the top of the grand staircase groaned open, silencing the string quartet instantly. The room turned as one, a sea of heads bowing slightly in deference. Alpha Ryker stood at the threshold, and for a moment the world narrowed down to just him. He was magnificent in his dress uniform, the black fabric tailored to accent the breadth of his shoulders, gold braiding catching the light like liquid fire. His dark hair was swept back, revealing the sharp, aristocratic lines of his face. But it was his eyes that stole the breath from my lungs. Golden, fierce, and currently scanning the crowd with the intensity of a searchlight. When his gaze swept over the room and landed on me, I felt the connection slam into my chest like a physical blow. It was real. The bond was real. I took an involuntary step forward, my hands trembling. He descended the stairs, the crowd parting for him like water for a ship. My heart soared with a foolish, desperate hope that perhaps the moon didn't care about my poverty or my lack of social standing. Perhaps he would claim me, and I would finally have a place where I was safe. He walked straight toward me, his stride purposeful, and I saw the recognition in his eyes. He knew. He felt it too. I prepared to bow, to submit, to welcome him as my other half. But he didn't stop in front of me. He stopped 3 feet away, his lip curling in a distinct expression of distaste that shattered my hope into 1,000 irreparable shards. He looked at me not with longing, but with the annoyance one might feel upon finding a stain on a pristine carpet. Alpha Ryker, I breathed, the name tumbling out before I could stop it. He ignored me completely. Instead, he turned slightly and extended his hand to the person standing just to my left. My stepsister, Ivy. She stepped out of the shadows I had been using to hide, radiant in a gown of blood-red silk that clung to her curves. She didn't look surprised. She looked victorious. She took his hand, her fingers interlacing with his, and the smugness radiating off her was hot enough to burn. Ryker turned back to face the room, his voice booming with the command tone that forced every wolf to listen. "The moon provides us with options," he announced, his voice cold and devoid of any warmth. "But an alpha chooses his destiny." I look at this creature before me, this Seraphina, and I see nothing but a void where strength should be. A wolf with no spirit cannot lead my pack. She cannot mother my heirs. I choose strength. I choose power. I choose Ivy. The silence that followed was deafening. It wasn't just a rejection, it was a public execution of my character. My knees shook, threatening to give way, but I locked them, refusing to fall. Ivy laughed, a high, tinkling sound that grated on my nerves like broken glass. She reached for a goblet of wine from a passing waiter, her eyes locking onto mine with malicious glee. "You heard him, trash," Ivy sneered, stepping closer so only I could smell the sweetness of the wine and the rot in her soul. "You thought the moon could save you? You are nothing. You are a stain on this pack." With a flick of her wrist, she upended the goblet. The cold red liquid splashed over my face, blinding me for a second, soaking into my grey dress and dripping down my chest like a fresh wound. The shock of the cold wine made me gasp, but it was the laughter that followed that truly hurt. The entire court, wolves I had grown up with, people I had served, erupted in amusement. I stood there, dripping and humiliated, while the man who was supposed to cherish me looked on with indifferent eyes, his hand firmly gripping the waist of the woman who tormented me. The shame burned hotter than fire. But deep in my gut, something else ignited. A spark of rage that tasted like copper and felt like a storm. They thought they had broken me. They were wrong. Chapter 2. The Forbidden Reciprocal. The red wine dripped from my chin onto the cold marble floor, counting out the seconds of my humiliation like a metronome. 1 drop. 2 drops. 3. Around me, the laughter of the court began to die down, replaced by a suffocating expectancy. They were waiting for me to run. They were waiting for the little gray mouse to scurry back into the wainscoting where she belonged, sobbing and broken, leaving the beautiful couple to their victory. Ryker had already turned his back to me, his arm wrapped possessively around Ivy's waist, as if I had already ceased to exist. To him, the rejection was a completed transaction, a piece of administrative paperwork filed and forgotten. He had discarded me, and in his mind, that was the absolute end of the story. But as I stared at the back of his dress uniform, watching the muscles shift beneath the expensive black fabric, the heat in my gut flared into an inferno. It wasn't sadness. It wasn't despair. It was a violent, clarifying fury. He had not just rejected me. He had performed it for an audience, using my pain to purchase social credit with the elite. He treated the sacred mate bond, a connection wolves waited lifetimes for, as a mistake to be corrected. I wiped the wine from my eyes with the back of my hand, smearing the crimson stain across my cheek like war paint. I did not run. Instead, I walked toward the dais. The sound of my footsteps was wet and heavy, but steady. A murmur rippled through the crowd as they realized I wasn't retreating. Ivy turned, her smirk faltering slightly when she saw the expression on my face. She elbowed Ryker, who turned around with a look of profound irritation, as if a fly he had swatted was still buzzing. "I dismissed you, Seraphina," Ryker stated, his voice flat. "Leave, before I have the guards drag you out." I didn't stop until I was standing directly in front of them. The microphone stand, used for his grand announcement, was still there. I reached out and grabbed the cold metal, my knuckles turning white. The feedback whined, a sharp screech that made the entire court wince, but it ensured I had their undivided attention. "You dismissed me," I repeated, my voice amplified, booming through the crystal hall with a power that surprised even me. "You think you have the right to determine my value based on the colour of my dress and the rumours of your sycophants. You think the moon makes mistakes." Ryker stepped forward, his golden eyes narrowing dangerously. "Put the microphone down. You are embarrassing yourself." "No, Alpha," I said, the title tasting like ash in my mouth. "I am embarrassing you." I took a deep breath, drawing on every scrap of dignity I had left. I looked him dead in the eye, focusing on the golden thread of the mate bond that still hummed between us, tattered but alive. "You rejected me because you are weak. You fear what the other packs would say. You chose a mate who is nothing but a mirror for your own vanity." "Silence!" Ryker roared, his alpha command rolling over me. It hit me with the force of a physical wave, designed to force submission. But I didn't buckle. The rage held me upright. "I will not be silent," I said, my voice steady and cold as winter. "And I will not be a victim you leave bleeding on the floor. I, Rhea of the Silver Moon Pack, hear your rejection." I paused, letting the words hang in the air. "And I reject you back."
The gasp that tore through the room sucked all the oxygen out of the hall. Reciprocal rejection was a myth, a piece of ancient history that no one invoked because no one dared to challenge an alpha. But I had said the words. I focused on the bond, grasped it with my mind, and pulled. "I deny your claim," I continued, shouting over the rising murmurs. "I deny your blood. I find you unworthy, Ryker. I sever this tie." I slammed my mental walls down on the connection. The reaction was instantaneous and violent. Ryker's eyes went wide, his pupils dilating in shock. He stumbled back, clutching at his chest as if he had been shot. A groan of pure agony ripped from his throat, and he fell to one knee, gasping for air. Blood began to trickle from his nose, matching the wine on my dress. The bond shattered with a sound like a cracking whip that only we could feel. A psychic backlash that sent Ivy stumbling away from him in horror. I stood over him, the rejected runt looking down at the kneeling Alpha. And for the first time in my life, the silence in the room wasn't mocking. It was terrified. Chapter 3. Treason of the Rogue. The sight of Alpha Ryker on his knees, clutching his chest while blood dripped onto his pristine uniform, froze the entire ballroom in a tableau of disbelief. He wheezed, his face pale and slick with sweat, the physical toll of a severed bond hitting him far harder than it hit me. I felt a strange emptiness, a hollow space where the connection had been, but no pain. It was as if a heavy chain had been cut from around my neck. I looked at the man who was supposed to be my destiny, now reduced to a trembling mess, because his ego couldn't handle the spiritual recoil of being denied by a nobody. But the moment of triumph was short-lived. A slow, rhythmic clapping echoed from the balcony above, a sound that was heavy and ominous, like the tolling of a funeral bell. The crowd parted instantly, dropping into deep bows, faces pressed toward the floor. Even Ivy, who had been staring at Ryker in horror, fell to her knees, her face drained of colour. King Magnus was descending. The ruler of the 7 packs walked down the grand staircase with a leisurely, predatory grace. He was an imposing figure, draped in a cloak made from the pelts of grey wolves, a gruesome reminder that his authority was built on the bones of his own kind. His silver hair caught the light, and his pale blue eyes locked onto me with a cold, dissecting interest. He ignored Ryker completely. He stepped over the kneeling Alpha as one might step over a piece of furniture, stopping only when he towered over me. The air grew frigid, the temperature in the room plummeting as his aura expanded, suffocating and dense. "Fascinating," Magnus said, his voice soft but carrying to every corner of the silent hall. "In 300 years of rule, I have never seen a low-born wolf break an alpha. It defies nature. It defies order." I wanted to look away, to bow like the others, but my body refused to move. I met his gaze, my chin held high, despite the terror clawing at my throat. "He rejected me, Your Majesty. I only finished what he started." Magnus smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "An alpha's rejection is his right. It is the exercise of discernment. But for a common wolf, a wolf with no rank, no family name, no spirit, to reject a leader?" He shook his head slowly. "That is not rejection, child. That is insurrection." He turned to the crowd, spreading his arms wide. "Society functions because we know our place. The strong lead. The weak serve. If we allow the weak to judge the strong, we invite chaos. We become no better than the humans." He turned back to me, his expression hardening into granite. "You have disrupted the hierarchy, Seraphina. You have assaulted a high-ranking officer of the crown with spiritual violence. This is treason." Ivy scrambled forward on her knees, seeing her chance. "She is a defect, Your Majesty. She has always been broken. She attacked Alpha Ryker out of jealousy." Magnus didn't even look at her. "The reason does not matter.
The act is condemned."
He looked down at me, and I saw my death in his eyes. "By the power vested in me by the ancient councils, I strip you of your pack status. You are no longer Seraphina of the Silver Moon. You are nameless. You are rogue." He gestured to the royal guard, massive wolves in iron armor who stepped out of the shadows. "We do not waste executioners on defects," Magnus declared, his voice ringing with finality. "Take her to the western border. Throw her into the Deadlands. Let the shadow stalkers feast tonight." A scream rose in my throat, but I bit it back. The Deadlands. It was a death sentence worse than beheading. No one survived the cursed forest. It was a place of eternal night, inhabited by creatures that hunted by sound and smelled fear. "Father!" I looked frantically toward the crowd, finding the face of Beta Vance, the man who had raised me. "Father, please!" My father looked at me, then looked at the king. He stepped back, turning his face away. "I have no daughter," he muttered, loud enough for the king to hear. "The girl is a rogue." 2 guards grabbed my arms, their armored gauntlets biting into my skin. I didn't fight them. It would be useless. As they dragged me backward, pulling me away from the warmth and the light, I saw Ryker finally look up. His eyes met mine, filled with confusion and lingering pain. But he said nothing. He did nothing. I was being erased, cast out into the dark, and the last thing I saw before the doors slammed shut was Ivy's smile returning, sharp and satisfied. Chapter 4. Into the Mouth of Hell. The transition from the opulent warmth of the palace to the biting cold of the western border was a shock to the system that left me gasping. The royal guards didn't bother with pleasantries. They dragged me to the edge of the kingdom's territory, where the lush green grass abruptly died, replaced by a jagged line of grey soil that marked the beginning of the Deadlands. Beyond that line, the world dissolved into a wall of unnatural darkness. The trees were twisted skeletal things, their bark black as charcoal, bleeding a thick tar-like sap that smelled of rot and sulphur. There was no moonlight here. The heavy canopy strangled the sky, leaving only an abyssal gloom. "Enjoy your freedom, rogue," one of the guards grunted. With a heavy shove, he sent me stumbling across the border. I fell hard, my hand scraping against the sharp, dead earth. I scrambled to my feet and turned back, but the guards were already retreating, their lanterns bobbing away like fading stars. I was alone. The silence of the Deadlands was heavy, a physical weight that pressed against my eardrums. It wasn't the peaceful quiet of a sleeping forest. It was the held breath of a predator waiting to strike. I hugged my arms around myself, shivering violently. The wine had dried on my dress, leaving it stiff and sticky, offering no protection against the freezing wind that whispered through the skeletal branches. I took a hesitant step forward, my satin slippers crunching loudly on the dry, brittle underbrush. The sound echoed like a gunshot in the stillness. I froze, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. "Keep moving," my instincts screamed. Standing still is death. I forced myself to walk, moving deeper into the shadows. My eyes strained to adjust, but the darkness was absolute. I had to navigate by touch, my hands brushing against the rough, weeping bark of the trees. The sap was sticky and cold, clinging to my skin like oil. Every shadow seemed to move. Every rustle of the wind sounded like footsteps. I was a wolf with no wolf spirit, a human in a world of monsters, armed with nothing but a ruined dress and a broken heart. Then I heard it. A chittering sound, like insects skittering over dry leaves, but louder, heavier. It came from somewhere above me. I stopped, holding my breath until my lungs burned. The sound came again, closer this time, accompanied by the wet drip of saliva hitting the ground. Click, click, click. I looked up, squinting into the canopy. 2 pale, milky orbs ignited in the darkness, eyes that held no pupils, only a hunger that felt ancient and bottomless. Then 2 more appeared, then 4. A creature uncoiled itself from the branches, hanging upside down like a bat, but it was the size of a bear. Its skin was translucent and grey, stretched tight over jagged bones. It opened its mouth, revealing rows of needle-like teeth, and let out a hiss that smelled of old blood. A shadow stalker. Panic, hot and primal, flooded my veins. I didn't think. I ran. I bolted blindly through the trees, branches whipping against my face, tearing at my skin and dress. The satin slippers shredded within seconds, leaving my feet bare and bleeding on the sharp stones. But I couldn't stop. Behind me, the heavy thump, thump, thump of the creature dropping to the ground and giving chase echoed through the forest. I scrambled over a fallen log, my breath tearing at my throat in ragged gasps. The chittering was getting louder, multiplying. There wasn't just one. The pack had found me. I could hear them flanking me, moving through the trees with terrifying speed. I risked a glance over my shoulder and saw a blur of grey motion closing in, claws tearing up the earth. I pushed myself faster, my legs burning, but the ground suddenly vanished beneath my feet. I screamed as I plummeted into a ravine I hadn't seen in the dark. I tumbled down the steep slope, hitting rocks and roots, rolling uncontrollably until I slammed into the hard stone floor of a canyon. The impact knocked the wind out of me, leaving me gasping and broken on the cold ground. Above me, at the edge of the ravine, the chittering stopped. The pale eyes peered down, glowing in the dark. They had me cornered. There was nowhere left to run. I tried to push myself up, but my ankle screamed in agony. I collapsed back, staring up at the monsters descending the slope. And for the first time, I prayed to the ancients not for rescue, but for a quick end. Chapter 5. The Ruins of the Ancients. The pain in my ankle was a white-hot spike that radiated up my leg with every heartbeat, pinning me to the cold stone floor of the ravine. Above me, the shadow stalkers were descending the slope with terrifying grace, their claws digging into the rock face like climbing picks. The clicking sound of their mandibles echoed off the canyon walls, a rhythmic death knell that grew louder with every second. I dragged myself backward, my fingernails scraping uselessly against the unforgiving ground, weaving trails of blood on the dark stone. I bumped into something solid and cold. I turned, expecting a rock wall, but instead, my hands met smooth, polished obsidian. It wasn't a natural formation. I squinted through the gloom and realized I had landed in a courtyard of some kind. Massive pillars, broken and weathered by time, rose into the darkness like the ribs of a giant beast. The ground here was paved with flat black stones, meticulously laid out in patterns that made my eyes hurt if I looked at them too long. In the center of the courtyard sat a structure that looked untouched by the decay around it. A low, circular altar surrounding a pool of water so black it seemed to drink the meager light. The stalkers reached the bottom of the ravine. The lead creature, a nightmare of grey skin and clicking teeth, stalked onto the paved stones. But then it stopped. It hissed, rearing back as if it had hit an invisible wall. It paced back and forth at the edge of the courtyard, snapping its jaws at the air, but it refused to cross the threshold of the ruins. The other creatures gathered behind it, a writhing mass of hunger, but they too held back, their milky eyes fixed on me with frustrated rage. They were afraid. These apex predators, who hunted everything in the Deadlands, were terrified of this place. I let out a ragged breath, the realization settling over me like a cold shroud. If the monsters outside were afraid to come in, what was living inside that was worse? I turned my attention back to the pool. The water was perfectly still, devoid of ripples, looking more like a solid slab of onyx than liquid. As I stared at it, a faint whisper brushed against the edge of my mind. Not a sound, but a sensation, like a cold finger tracing the back of my neck. Come. I flinched, looking around for the source of the voice, but the courtyard was empty. Come, daughter of the void. The whisper was louder this time, resonating in my bones. It pulled at me, a magnetic force far stronger than the mate bond I had severed hours ago. Despite the screaming pain in my ankle, I crawled toward the pool. The fear of the monsters behind me faded, replaced by an overwhelming compulsion to touch that black water. It felt like thirst, a parched, desperate need that I hadn't known I was carrying. I reached the edge of the altar and pulled myself up. The water was unnaturally cold, radiating a chill that made my breath mist in the air. I peered into the depths, but there was no reflection of my battered face. Instead, deep within the abyss of the pool, I saw a flicker of violet light. It pulsed like a heartbeat, slow and steady. "Who are you?" I croaked, my voice rough from screaming. "We are the silence between the stars," the voice echoed, filling my head with the roar of a distant ocean. "We are the judgment you seek." The violet light grew brighter, rising toward the surface. My hand moved on its own, trembling as it hovered over the liquid. I knew, with a certainty that defied logic, that if I touched this water, I would not be the same person who crawled away. The girl who had been rejected, humiliated, and exiled would die here. Behind me, the stalkers shrieked, their hunger overcoming their fear, as the first one placed a claw onto the obsidian pavement. It was now or never. I didn't look back. I plunged my hand into the icy blackness. Chapter 6. The Bloodline Revealed. The moment my skin broke the surface of the pool, the world vanished. There was no ravine, no monsters, no pain. I was floating in a vast, endless expanse of nothingness. It wasn't dark, it was the absence of light, a vacuum so profound it felt heavy. I tried to breathe, but there was no air. I tried to scream, but I had no voice. I was unmoored, drifting in the void. Then the visions hit me. They didn't come as pictures, but as memories that weren't mine, slamming into my consciousness with the force of a landslide. I saw wolves, thousands of them, bowing not to a king, but to a woman with eyes of burning violet. I saw her speak, and mountains crumbled. I saw her whisper, and armies fell into slumber. I felt her power, vast and cold, different from the warm, frantic energy of the sun-fed wolves I knew.
This power was quiet. It was the stillness of the grave, the patience of the eclipse. The Eclipse bloodline, the voice thundered, vibrating through my very soul. Born once every millennium, the judges of the corrupt, the silencers of the arrogant. I saw the history of my ancestors hunted down by jealous alphas who feared a power they couldn't control. I saw the last Eclipse Queen hiding her child, my ancestor, binding her bloodline with powerful seals to keep her safe, to keep her hidden until the time was right. You were not weak, little star, the voice softened, almost maternal now. You were sleeping. Your vessel was too fragile to hold the void. So we waited. The scene shifted. I saw myself at the ball, standing in the wine, taking the microphone. I saw the reciprocal rejection. You broke the bond, the voice noted with approval. You rejected the false hierarchy. You proved yourself worthy. I was back in the void now, floating before a massive, swirling vortex of violet energy. It was beautiful and terrifying, a hurricane of pure magic waiting to be claimed. The seal is broken, the voice said, but the vessel must be reforged. To hold the void is to endure the breaking of the self. If you are weak, this power will unmake you. If you are strong, you will be reborn. I have nothing left to lose, I thought, projecting the words with all the defiance I had left. They took my name, they took my home, they took my life. Then give us your pain, the voice commanded. Give us your rage, and we will give you a crown. The vortex surged forward, engulfing me. Chapter 7. The Violet Gaze. The pain was absolute. It wasn't like the injury to my ankle or the sting of the wine in my eyes. This was cellular. It felt as if every bone in my body was being pulverized into dust and then knit back together with iron wire. My blood boiled in my veins, burning away the weakness, burning away the human fragility. I screamed, a sound that tore my throat raw, but the darkness swallowed it whole. My spine arched, reshaping, strengthening. My senses expanded violently. I could suddenly hear the heartbeat of a mouse buried 3 feet underground a mile away. I could smell the ozone of the coming storm. I could feel the rotation of the earth beneath me. It was too much, a sensory overload that threatened to shatter my mind. But I held on. I focused on Ryker's face. I focused on Ivy's laughter. I used my hatred as an anchor, tethering myself to reality while the magic rewrote my DNA. Then, as quickly as it had begun, the agony stopped. I gasped, my eyes flying open. I was back in the courtyard. The air was cold, but I didn't feel it. The pain in my ankle was gone. I pushed myself up, moving with a fluid grace that felt alien to my clumsy limbs. I looked down at my hands. The skin was pale, flawless, glowing faintly in the gloom. The dirt and blood were gone. I crawled to the edge of the pool and looked into the black water. The girl staring back at me was a stranger. My mousy brown hair was gone, replaced by cascading waves of midnight blue that shimmered like a raven's wing. My face was sharper, the soft angles of youth hardened into something regal and dangerous. But it was my eyes that held me captive. The muddy brown was gone. In their place were irises of glowing electric violet, the mark of the eclipse. They swirled with inner light, illuminating the dark water with their own bioluminescence. A low growl from behind broke my trance. I stood up slowly, turning to face the threat. The shadow stalkers had finally entered the courtyard. The pack leader, a massive beast with scars crossing its eyeless face, stood 10 feet away, drool dripping from its jaws. It had smelled the magic and come to feed. Before I would have cowered, I would have run. But now? Now I looked at the creature and felt nothing but annoyance. The fear had been burned out of me in the void. The beast lunged, a blur of muscle and teeth aimed straight for my throat. Time seemed to slow down. I didn't dodge. I didn't shift. I didn't need to. I simply felt the power uncoil in my chest, rising to my throat like a dark tide. I opened my mouth, and the void voice spilled out. Not a shout, but a whisper that carried the weight of a collapsing star. Stop. The word hit the air like a physical shockwave. The beast froze mid-air, its momentum arrested by an invisible force. It slammed into the ground, inches from my feet, whining in confusion. Its limbs locked up, fighting against its own muscles, but it couldn't move. The command was absolute. I walked toward it, the other stalkers shrinking back into the shadows. I reached out and placed my hand on the monster's snout. It trembled, not with aggression, but with submission. It recognized what I was. It recognized the top of the food chain. "Good boy," I whispered, my violet eyes blazing in the dark. "Now we have work to do." Chapter 8. The First Command. The massive shadow stalker whimpered beneath my touch, its skin vibrating with the terrified energy of a predator that had suddenly realized it was prey. The rest of its pack chittered nervously in the gloom, their eyeless faces twitching as they sensed the shift in the hierarchy. They had come to feast on a weak, discarded rogue, but instead, they had found a queen. I could feel their primitive minds brushing against mine, a chaotic static of hunger and instinct that silenced instantly when I pushed back with my own will. I ran my hand over the beast's head, feeling the ridges of bone beneath the translucent grey skin. It was hideous, a nightmare made flesh, but in its submission, I saw potential. "You are not a monster," I murmured, my voice vibrating with the strange, harmonic resonance of the void. "You are a weapon." I stepped back, and the creature remained frozen, its chest heaving. I focused on the feeling in my throat, the new muscle that felt like cold iron. The power was intoxicating, a heady rush that made my fingertips tingle. But I knew raw power wasn't enough. I needed control. If I was going to return to the kingdom that had exiled me, I couldn't just be a girl with scary eyes. I had to be a master of this new reality. "Stand," I commanded. The beast scrambled to its feet instantly, its movements jerky and eager to please. It towered over me, easily 7 feet at the shoulder, but it kept its head lowered, exposing its throat in the ultimate gesture of submission. "Your name is Obsidian," I decided, looking at its dark, jagged claws, "and you are the first of my court." I looked up at the other creatures lurking in the shadows of the ruins. There were dozens of them, watching, waiting. I spread my arms, letting my violet aura flare, illuminating the broken temple in a wash of purple light. "Kneel," I whispered. It wasn't a request. The command rippled through the courtyard, hitting every living thing with the force of gravity increasing tenfold. The pack dropped as one. From the smallest scout to the largest brute, they slammed their bodies against the cold stone floor. The silence that followed was absolute. I stood amidst a sea of bowing monsters, the exiled runt of the Silver Moon pack, now commanding the deadliest creatures in the Deadlands. I looked up at the sliver of sky visible through the canopy, where the faint light of the moon I used to worship tried to penetrate the gloom. I didn't need the moon anymore. I had the dark. And in the dark, I was invincible. A smile touched my lips, sharp and cold. They thought I was dead. They thought the story was over. But as I looked at my army of nightmares, I knew the story was just beginning. I would survive this forest. I would master this power. And when I returned, the kingdom would learn the true definition of fear. Chapter 9. The Wedding Crashes. 1 month. 30 days of surviving in the Deadlands had changed me more than 20 years of living in the pack ever had. I had stopped counting the days by the rising sun I couldn't see and started measuring time by the growth of my power. I had learned to weave shadows into clothing, replacing my ruined grey dress with a gown spun from pure darkness that moved like liquid smoke around my ankles. I had learned to see without light, to hunt without sound, and to kill without mercy. The girl who had begged for approval was dead, buried in the mud of the ravine. The woman who walked out of the forest edge was something else entirely. The kingdom was glowing on the horizon, the lights of the capital city burning bright against the night sky. It was the night of the mating ceremony. My heightened senses could hear the distant drums, smell the roasting meat, and feel the collective excitement of the pack. Ryker and Ivy were sealing their union tonight. The king would be there. My father would be there. Everyone who had laughed at me would be gathered in the arena of kings to witness the triumph of the strong. I stood at the massive iron gates of the arena, flanked by obsidian. The shadow stalker huffed, his breath steaming in the cool night air. The guards posted at the entrance didn't even see us approach. I had wrapped us in a veil of silence, a trick I'd picked up from the whispering voices in the Eclipse pool. "Open," I whispered to the heavy lock. The mechanism groaned, the iron tumblers turning with a snap that sounded like a breaking bone. The gates swung inward. Inside, the arena was packed. Thousands of wolves filled the stone tiers, cheering as Ryker and Ivy stood on the central dais. Ivy looked radiant in white and gold, triumph painted on her face. Ryker looked distracted. Even from here, I could see the tension in his shoulders. I stepped into the tunnel leading to the arena floor. The torches lining the walls flickered and died as I passed, extinguishing in deference to the eclipse. Darkness followed me like a loyal hound. "Let the union be sealed," the high priest shouted, raising his hands. "I object," I said. I didn't shout. I didn't have to. The void voice carried my words through the stone, through the air, through the very bones of everyone present. It was a sound that bypassed the ears and went straight to the primitive part of the brain that feared the dark. The cheering died instantly. The torches in the entire arena flared once, and then went out, plunging 10,000 wolves into pitch blackness. Screams of panic erupted, but were cut short as two glowing violet eyes ignited in the tunnel entrance. I walked out onto the sand. The shadows clung to me, swirling and dancing, making me look 10 feet tall. Obsidian padded beside me, his growl vibrating through the ground. I saw the recognition hit the front row first. I saw the color drain from my father's face. I saw the king lean forward on his throne, his eyes narrowing. But my gaze was fixed on the couple on the dais. Ivy dropped her bouquet. Ryker took a step back, his mouth opening and closing like a fish. "You're dead!" Ivy shrieked, her voice cracking. "The king exiled you! You're dead!" I stopped at the base of the dais.
The violet light from my eyes was strong enough to illuminate their terrified faces. I agreed calmly. But hell spat me back out. It seems even the demons didn't want me. Chapter 10. Bow before the void. The shock in the arena was a tangible thing, a heavy, suffocating blanket of disbelief that draped over the crowd. They stared at me. The girl they had mocked. The rogue they had discarded. Standing before them, not as a corpse, but as a goddess of the night. The violet glow of my eyes cast long, eerie shadows across the sand, and obsidian let out a roar that shook the dust from the stone tiers, silencing the few murmurs of protest. "Guards!" Ivy screamed, pointing a trembling finger at me. "Seize her! Kill the abomination!" The Royal Guard, 10 elite warriors clad in King Magnus's iron armor, rushed from the sidelines. They were the best killers in the kingdom, wolves trained to take down bears and rogues without breaking a sweat. They moved in a synchronized formation, spears leveled, circling me with practiced efficiency. Ryker stepped forward, his hand reaching for his sword, but he hesitated. He was staring at me, really staring at me, and I could see the confusion warring with the duty in his eyes. But I didn't have time for his internal conflict. The lead guard lunged, his spear tip aiming for my heart. I didn't shift. I didn't raise my hands. I didn't even blink. I simply turned my head slightly and let the power uncoil from my throat. Sleep. The command was soft, like a mother soothing a child, but the magic behind it was a sledgehammer. The effect was instantaneous. The lead guard's eyes rolled back in his head, and he collapsed mid-stride, his armor clattering loudly against the stone. The 9 guards behind him followed suit, dropping like puppets whose strings had been cut. They hit the sand in a heap of metal and unconscious flesh, snoring softly. The silence that followed was louder than the roar of the crowd had been. 10 elite warriors, defeated with a single word. No blood, no fight, just absolute, terrifying dominance. I stepped over the sleeping bodies, my gown of shadows flowing over the metal like water. I walked up the stairs of the dais, the sound of my bare feet on the stone echoing in the stillness. I stopped in front of Ivy. She was trembling so violently that the gold jewelry around her neck rattled. "You," she stammered, backing away until she hit the altar. "What are you?" "I am the consequence of your arrogance," I said, my voice cool and even. "I am the shadow in the corner of your eye. I am the Eclipse." Ivy's fear turned to a frantic, cornered rage. She raised her hand to slap me, a reflex born of a lifetime of bullying me without consequence. "I am the future, Luna. You are nothing but trash." I caught her wrist in midair. My grip was iron. I leaned in close, letting her see the infinite void swirling in my violet eyes. "Kneel," I whispered. A sickening crunch echoed through the silent arena as the magic forced her body to comply against the limits of her anatomy. Ivy screamed as her knees slammed into the stone with bone-shattering force. She collapsed, pinned to the floor by the weight of my command, unable to lift her head. I looked down at her, the woman who had tormented me for years, now reduced to a weeping heap at my feet. "You look better down there," I observed, tilting my head. "It suits you." I released her wrist and turned to face Ryker. He was standing frozen, his golden eyes wide with a mixture of horror and awe. The bond between us, the one I had severed, was pulsing in the air,
reacting to the proximity of my awakened power. He wasn't looking at me with disgust anymore. He was looking at me like I was the only thing in the world that mattered. And that, somehow, was even worse. Chapter 11. The Humiliation of Ivy. The sound of Ivy's knees hitting the stone floor echoed in the silence of the arena like a gavel striking a block. It was a sound of absolute finality. She remained there, hunched over, her expensive white wedding gown pooling around her like spilt milk, her breathing coming in jagged, terrified gasps. The command I had woven into the air, kneel, wasn't just a physical instruction. It was a spiritual weight. I could feel her struggling against it, her wolf clawing at the psychic bars I had slammed down around her will. But she was powerless. She, who had spent years stepping on my fingers to lift herself higher, was now physically incapable of looking down on me. I stood over her, the shadows of my gown swirling lazily around my ankles, as if they had a mind of their own. The violet light from my eyes bathed her in an eerie supernatural glow, illuminating the mascara running down her cheeks. The crowd in the tiers above us was frozen. 10,000 wolves holding their breath, witnessing a hierarchy collapse in real time. They had come to see a royal wedding. Instead, they were watching a revolution. "Please," Ivy whimpered, the word tearing out of her throat against her will. She tried to lift her head, her neck muscles straining, veins popping on her forehead, but the void voice held her face pressed toward the dust. "Rhea, stop. It hurts." "Does it?" I asked softly, tilting my head. I walked a slow circle around her, letting the silence stretch. "Does it hurt to be helpless, Ivy? Does it hurt to have your agency stripped away, to be looked at with pity and disgust by the very people you tried so hard to impress?" I stopped in front of her and crouched down, bringing my face level with hers. "This is the feeling you gifted me every single day of my life. You poured wine on me. You laughed when I was exiled. You toasted to my death while wearing my mother's jewelry." I reached out and touched the pearl necklace resting against her throat, an heirloom she had stolen from my room the day I was dragged away. With a flick of my finger, the string snapped. Pearls scattered across the stone floor, bouncing with hollow clicks. I am simply returning the favor. I stood up and turned my back on her. I released the pressure of the command just enough that she could breathe, but not enough for her to stand. She collapsed forward onto her hands, sobbing openly now, a mess of ruined silk and shattered ego. I looked up at Ryker. He hadn't moved. He hadn't stepped forward to help his bride. He hadn't drawn his sword to defend her honor. He was just staring at me. His golden eyes were blown wide, the pupils dilated so fully they looked black. His chest was heaving, his breath coming in short, sharp bursts. I could feel what was happening to him, because I could feel the echo of it in my own chest. The mate bond, the connection I had violently severed at the Solstice Ball, was re-knitting itself. But it wasn't the fragile, polite thread it had been before. It was roaring back to life with the ferocity of a forest fire, fueled by the sheer magnitude of the power I now wielded. He looked from me, glowing, powerful, surrounded by a loyal shadow beast, to Ivy, who was sniveling in the dirt. The contrast was brutal. I saw the moment the realization hit him. He had traded a goddess for a parasite. The disgust on his face as he looked at Ivy was visceral, but the hunger on his face when he looked back at me was terrifying. He took a step forward, his hands trembling, as if he were approaching a holy relic he was afraid to touch,
but desperate to possess. Chapter 12. Regret of the Alpha. "Raya," Ryker breathed, the name leaving his lips like a prayer. He took another step, stepping right over Ivy's sobbing form, as if she were nothing more than a discarded rug. He didn't even look down at the woman he was supposed to marry 5 minutes ago. His entire world had narrowed down to me. The crowd murmured, a ripple of shock moving through the stands. An alpha abandoning his chosen mate at the altar to pursue the rogue he had exiled? It was scandalous. It was pathetic. And it was exactly what I wanted them to see. Ryker stopped 3 feet away from me, the same distance he had stood when he rejected me at the ball. But the dynamic had flipped completely. Then he had been the towering figure of authority. Now he looked small. He looked desperate. The golden uniform that had seemed so intimidating before now looked like a costume, a child playing soldier in the presence of a general. "I didn't know," he whispered, his voice cracking. He reached out a hand, his fingers hovering in the air between us, trembling. "The bond. It's singing, Rhea. Can you feel it?" "It's louder than it ever was. It's pulling me to you." I looked at his hand, then up to his eyes. I felt the pull, of course. Biology was a cruel architect. My wolf recognized him, and despite everything, a biological imperative urged me to close the distance. But I wasn't just a wolf anymore. I was the Eclipse, and the Eclipse did not bow to biology. "I feel it," I admitted, my voice cool and detached. "I feel a biological trick designed to ensure propagation. But I do not feel anything for you, Ryker." He flinched as if I had slapped him. "Don't say that. I made a mistake, a terrible, blind mistake. I thought I needed a Luna who could strengthen the pack's standing. I listened to the whispers. I listened to the king." He took a desperate step closer, invading my personal space. "But look at you. You are magnificent. You are power incarnate. You are the strongest thing I have ever seen. We could rule this kingdom, Rhea. You and I. We could be unstoppable." I laughed. It was a dry, humourless sound that silenced his plea. "And there it is," I said, my violet eyes flaring. "You don't want me, Ryker. You want my power. You want the status that comes with standing next to the Eclipse. If I had come back scarred and broken, if I had crawled back begging for scraps, you would have let the guards kill me." "No," he protested, but his eyes darted away, betraying the lie. "Yes," I countered, my voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "You rejected me when I was Rhea the Runt. You do not get to claim me, now that I am the Queen of Night." I stepped closer to him, forcing him to look up at me even though he was taller. "You wanted strength. You chose Ivy because she projected the illusion of it. I am the reality of it. And I am telling you, Alpha Ryker, that you are unworthy. I do not want your apology. I do not want your heart. And I certainly do not want your bond." Ryker fell to his knees. It wasn't a command from my voice. It was the sheer weight of his own regret crushing him. He grabbed the hem of my shadow gown, burying his face in the fabric. "Please," he sobbed, breaking down completely in front of his pack. "Give me a chance to earn it back. I will do anything. I will serve you." I looked down at the top of his head, feeling nothing but a cold, distant pity. "You can't earn back what you threw away, Ryker. Some things, once broken, remain Enough!" The booming voice cut through the air like a cannon blast, shaking the very stones of the arena. I looked up. High above us, on the royal balcony, King Magnus had risen from his iron throne. He wasn't looking at Ryker. He wasn't looking at the weeping ivy. His pale, predatory eyes were locked solely on me. And unlike everyone else in the arena, he didn't look afraid. He looked hungry. Chapter 13. The King's Greed. King Magnus descended from the royal box, not taking the stairs, but leaping down to the arena floor with a supernatural agility that belied his age. He landed in a crouch, the stone cracking beneath his boots, and straightened up slowly. He was a massive man, broad and imposing, radiating an aura of ancient, corrupted power that tasted like copper and old blood. His wolf pelt cloak swirled around him as he walked toward us, his gaze fixed on me with a terrifying intensity. Ryker scrambled to his feet, wiping his eyes instead of trying to position himself between me and the king.
"Your Majesty,"
Ryker stammered, holding up a hand.
"This is a pack matter, a mate bond dispute. She is my mate, and we are resolving—"
Magnus backhanded him. It was a casual, almost lazy motion, but it sent Ryker flying 20 feet through the air. The Alpha slammed into the arena wall with a sickening crunch and slumped to the ground, unconscious. "He talks too much," Magnus muttered, stepping over the space where Ryker had stood. He stopped 10 paces from me. Obsidian, my shadow beast, bristled, a low growl rumbling in his chest, but I placed a hand on his flank to steady him. This was not a fight for a beast. This was a battle of wills. "So," Magnus said, his voice smooth and oily, "the legends were true. The Eclipse bloodline didn't die out, it merely went to sleep." He walked a slow semicircle around me, inspecting me like a horse he intended to buy. "I exiled a runt, and she returned a weapon. I should be angry at the deception, Seraphina, but I find myself opportunistically delighted." "My name is Rhea," I corrected, my void voice lacing the words with a warning hum. "And I am not your weapon." Magnus chuckled, a dark sound that made my skin crawl. "Oh, my dear, everything in this kingdom is mine. The land, the wolves, the air they breathe." He stopped directly in front of me, his height towering over mine. "Ryker is a fool. He sees you and sees a mate. He sees a love story." He sneered. "I see biology. I see genetics." A chill went down my spine that had nothing to do with the night air. "What do you want, Magnus?" "I want the bloodline," he said bluntly. "For 300 years, my armies have been strong but limited. We are bound by the moon. We are weak during the day. But you—" he gestured to the shadows swirling around me. "You draw from the void. You are constant. Imagine an army of soldiers with your gifts. Soldiers who can silence enemies with a whisper. Soldiers who can walk through shadows." His eyes gleamed with a fanatical light. "I do not want to execute you for treason, Rhea. That would be a waste of precious material. I am going to claim you. Not as a queen to sit beside me, but as a vessel." He took a step closer, his aura flaring, heavy and suffocating. "You will be brought to the Citadel. You will be bred, and you will produce a new generation of apex predators for my empire." The sheer violation in his words made red replace the violet in my vision for a split second. The audacity. The cruelty. He didn't see a person. He saw a broodmare for his war machine. "I would rather burn this kingdom to ash than let you touch me," I spat, the shadows around me spiking like spears.
Magnus smiled, revealing teeth that were sharpening into fangs. You have spirit. Good. Strong mothers make strong sons. But you are young, little wolf. You have unlocked your power, but you do not know how to wield it. He began to shift. His bones cracked and reshaped, fur sprouting from his skin. He grew larger and larger still, transforming not into a normal wolf, but into a monstrous werewolf. A creature distorted by dark magic, standing nearly 8 feet tall at the shoulder, with claws like obsidian daggers. Submit, the king roared, his voice now a guttural animal sound. Or I will break your legs and drag you to the breeding chambers myself. He lunged. The crowd screamed. I didn't move. I didn't shift. I stood my ground as the massive mountain of fur and muscle flew toward me, jaws wide enough to crush my skull. I closed my eyes and reached deep into the void, past the shadows, past the silence, grabbing hold of the very thing that made me the Eclipse. You want the void, Magnus? I thought. Then choke on it. Chapter 14. Shadows Don't Bleed. The roar of King Magnus shook the foundation of the arena, vibrating in the chests of 10,000 terrified spectators. He was a mountain of fur and muscle, a creature twisted by centuries of dark greed into something that barely resembled a wolf. As he lunged, his jaws opened wide enough to snap my spine like a dry twig, revealing rows of yellow, rotting teeth. The air pressure dropped as his massive body displaced the space between us, a freight train of violence aiming to crush me into the dirt. The crowd screamed, a collective sound of horror, expecting to see the insolent rogue torn apart in a spray of crimson. Ryker, still dazed on the ground near the wall, let out a strangled shout of warning. But it was too late. The king was upon me. I didn't flinch. I didn't run. I simply exhaled, releasing the hold I kept on my physical form. The moment Magnus's teeth clamped down on my shoulder, he didn't hit flesh and bone. He hit nothing. There was no crunch, no spray of blood, no resistance. His jaws snapped shut with a deafening clack, passing straight through me as if I were made of smoke. His momentum carried him forward, stumbling through the space where I had been standing, his claws scraping uselessly against the stone floor as he tried to regain his balance. I reformed 3 feet to his left. My body was no longer solid flesh. I was a silhouette cut from the fabric of the night, a 3-dimensional shadow that flickered and shifted with the wind. I was cold, intangible, and utterly indestructible. Magnus whirled around, a low, confused growl rumbling in his chest. He snapped his massive head back and forth, trying to lock onto my scent. But shadows have no scent. I was the void. I was the absence of everything he understood. You cannot break what you cannot touch, Magnus, I whispered. My voice didn't come from a throat. It came from everywhere at once, echoing off the arena walls like a dark chorus. The king snarled, his eyes burning with frustration. He swiped a paw the size of a shield at me, claws extended to eviscerate. Again, the blow passed harmlessly through my midsection, disturbing the smoke of my form, but causing no pain. It was like trying to fight a fog bank with a sword. I drifted around him, moving without footsteps, circling the beast that had ruled this land with an iron fist for 3 centuries. Is this the power you wanted to breed? I taunted, drifting closer to his snout. Is this the genetics you coveted? You wanted a weapon, King, but you forgot that weapons have no loyalty. They turn on whoever holds them. He roared again, a sound of pure fury, and unleashed a torrent of alpha command. Submit! The psychic weight of it slammed into the arena, forcing wolves in the front rows to their bellies, but the command washed over me like water over a stone. I had no alpha. I belonged to the Eclipse, and the Eclipse bowed to no terrestrial king. I solidified my hand just enough to give it mass, and backhanded him across the snout. It wasn't a killing blow, but the force of it snapped his head to the side, a humiliating slap that rang out like a gunshot. The great werewolf stumbled, shocked not by the pain, but by the disrespect. "You are fighting a ghost, old man," I said, my form solidifying slowly, transitioning from smoke back to the terrifying woman in the shadow gown. I stood before him, solid now, baiting him. "Come on, try again. Make it count." Magnus narrowed his eyes, sensing my return to physical form. He coiled his muscles, preparing for one final desperate strike to crush me while I was solid. He launched himself into the air, a flying leap intended to flatten me. I waited until he was inches away, until I could smell the rot on his breath. Then, I didn't turn into a shadow. I turned into a blade. I stepped inside his guard, under his massive paws, and placed my palm directly against the center of his chest, right over his thundering heart. Your reign ends now. Chapter 15. The Spirit Breaker. The moment my palm connected with the coarse fur of the king's chest, I didn't push. I pulled. This was not a technique of the physical world. It was the Eclipse curse, the dark magic I had learned in the silence of the ruins, whispered to me by ancestors who had been hunted to extinction by men like Magnus. They had taught me that a wolf's power, their spirit, their ability to shift, their connection to the pack, was not a permanent gift. It was a flame, and flames could be snuffed out. "I deny your spirit," I intoned, the void voice vibrating through my arm and into his ribcage. "I sever the thread." Magnus froze in midair, suspended not by gravity, but by the magical anchor of my grip. His eyes went wide, the pupils blowing out until they were entirely black. A network of inky violet veins erupted from beneath my hand, spreading across his chest and up his neck like a lightning strike of poison. He opened his jaws to roar, but no sound came out, only a dry, wheezing gasp. I dug my fingers in, not breaking the skin, but gripping the metaphysical essence beneath it. I grit my teeth and yanked. A tear appeared in the air, a shimmering distortion like heat rising off asphalt. With a sickening sound akin to wet canvas ripping, I tore his wolf spirit out of his body. It was a violent, blinding flash of energy. A translucent, ghostly wolf, the visual manifestation of his power, was dragged screaming from his physical form. It thrashed and clawed, trying to hold on to its host, but my will was absolute. I cast the spirit aside, dissipating it into the night air, where it dissolved like smoke in a gale. Magnus collapsed. His massive werewolf form didn't shift back gracefully. It unspooled. Bones crunched and shrank, fur receded rapidly, and muscle mass evaporated. In seconds, the terrifying monster that had dominated the arena was gone. In his place, huddled on the cold stone floor, was a naked, shivering old man. He looked frail, his skin sagging, his silver hair thin and wispy. Without the magic of his wolf to sustain him, the 300 years of his life crashed down on him all at once. The silence in the arena of kings was absolute. 10,000 wolves stared down at the naked, pathetic figure of their former ruler. There was no majesty left, no terror,
just a fragile human gasping for air in the dirt. I stood over him, my violet eyes blazing, my chest heaving with the effort. I looked up at the crowd, scanning the terrified faces of the nobles, the soldiers, the commoners. "Behold your king," I announced, my voice carrying to the furthest rows without shouting. "He ruled you through fear. He told you that strength was the only virtue. But look at him now. Without his fangs, without his fur. What is he?" Magnus reached a trembling hand toward my ankle, his eyes filled with confused tears. My wolf," he wheezed, his voice thin and reedy. "Give it back, please. I am the king." I looked down at him with cold detachment. "You are a man," I corrected, "just a man, and you will live the rest of your short days remembering what it felt like to be powerful, knowing you will never taste it again." I turned away from him, leaving him shivering in the dust. The royal guards, the ones who hadn't been put to sleep by my earlier command, backed away, lowering their spears. No one rushed to cover him. No one rushed to help. The hierarchy had been shattered. Movement caught my eye near the wall. Ryker was pulling himself up, using the stone barrier for support. He blinked, shaking his head to clear the concussion Magnus had given him. His gaze swept over the arena, the kneeling ivy, the broken king, and finally, me. He didn't look at me with the lust for power Magnus had shown. He looked at me with a desperate, devastating hope. He pushed himself off the wall and began to limp toward me, ignoring the blood running down his forehead. Chapter 16. The Verdict of Silence. Ryker limped across the arena sands, clutching his side where the king's blow had likely cracked a rib. He didn't look at Ivy, who was still weeping silently in her heap of ruined wedding silk. He didn't look at Magnus, the shriveled old man curling into a fetal ball. His golden eyes were fixed entirely on me, filled with a chaotic mix of awe, shame, and a desperate, clawing need. He stopped 5 paces away and fell to his knees again. This time it wasn't because of the bond or a command. It was a choice. He bowed his head, exposing his neck, the ultimate sign of submission from an alpha to his superior. "Rhea," he choked out, his voice thick with emotion. "You saved us. You stopped him. You are everything." I watched him, feeling the ghost of the girl I used to be whispering in the back of my mind. She wanted to run to him. She wanted to soothe his pain, to accept his submission, to be the benevolent mate who forgave and forgot. But that girl had died in the ravine. "I didn't do it for you," I said, my voice flat. "I did it because he threatened my freedom. Do not mistake my survival for your salvation." Ryker looked up, tears cutting tracks through the dust on his face. I know I don't deserve you. I was blind, Rhea. I let the politics and the whispers poison me. I rejected the best thing the moon ever gave me because I was too much of a coward to stand up for you." He crawled forward a few inches, his hand reaching out, but not daring to touch the hem of my shadow gown. "But the bond, it's still there. I can feel it pulling. We can rebuild." "Let me serve you. Let me spend the rest of my life making it up to you." It was a beautiful speech. It was the speech every rejected heroine in every story dreamed of hearing. The groveling alpha, finally understanding his mistake. I looked over at Ivy. She had stopped crying and was watching us,
her face pale and terrified. She knew that her fate hung on my answer. If I took Ryker back, she was finished. "Ryker," I said softly. He perked up, hope flooding his face. "Yes?" "Do you remember the Solstice Ball?" I asked. "Do you remember when Ivy poured wine on me? You laughed. You didn't just stand by, you smirked." The hope on his face faltered. I was trying to fit the role. I was foolish. "And when the king ordered me to the Deadlands," I continued, my voice hardening like cooling lava, "when the guards dragged me away to be eaten by monsters, did you fight for me then? Did you offer to take my place? Did you even look me in the eye?" He swallowed hard, his head dropping. "No." "Exactly." I stepped back, putting distance between us. "A mistake is spilling a drink, Ryker. A mistake is forgetting a name. Betrayal? Betrayal is a choice. You chose to let me die. You chose her." I pointed a sharp finger at Ivy. "You only want me now because I am the queen. If I were still the gray mouse in the corner, you wouldn't be kneeling. You would be laughing." "That's not true," he cried, but the lie was weak. "It is true," I said, my void voice slamming the words into his chest. "I do not want a mate who only loves me when I am holding a sword. The bond is dead, Ryker, and your time in my kingdom is over." I turned to the crowd, addressing the thousands of silent watchers. "There is a new law in this land. Betrayal has a cost. Cruelty has a price." I raised my hand toward the center of the arena. The air shimmered and cracked. A vortex of black energy began to swirl, tearing open a hole in reality. It wasn't a weapon this time. It was a door. Through the swirling darkness, the cold, rotting scent of tar and sulfur wafted out. The audience gasped as they recognized the landscape visible through the portal. The Deadlands. "No," Ryker whispered, scrambling back. "Rhea, please, anything but that." "You sentenced me to this darkness without a second thought," I told him, my face a mask of stone. "You thought it was a fitting end for a weak wolf. Now, you will have the chance to prove how strong you really are." Chapter 17. Empress of the Night. The portal to the Deadlands churned like a black eye in the center of the arena, whispering of cold and hunger. The scent of the cursed forest spilled out, making the wolves in the front rows whine and tuck their tails. It was a death sentence, and everyone knew it. "Up," I commanded. Ryker and Ivy were yanked to their feet by the invisible force of my will. Ivy began to scream, a high, thin sound of pure terror, trashing against the magical hold. Ryker dug his heels into the stone, fighting with every ounce of his alpha strength, but against the Eclipse, he was nothing more than a child fighting a gale. "This is madness!" Ryker shouted, panic cracking his voice. "We will die in there! We are not like you! We can't survive the shadows!" "Then you should have thought of that before you threw me in," I replied calmly. I walked them toward the swirling vortex. My shadow beast, Obsidian, materialized from the darkness at my side, snapping his jaws at Ivy's heels to keep her moving. "I am generous," I said, stopping them at the precipice of the portal. "I went in with nothing. No weapon, no hope. You will have each other." I looked at Ryker one last time. "You chose her, Alpha. You wanted her strength? You wanted her status? Well, now she is all you have. Enjoy your eternity together." I reached into the folds of my gown and pulled out a single, rusted iron knife. A useless trinket I had found in the dirt on my first night in the forest.
I tossed it at Ryker's feet. It clattered loudly on the stone. "Survive," I whispered. With a final flick of my hand, I released the hold. Before they could run, a blast of wind from the void shoved them backward. They tumbled through the tear in reality, their screams cut short as they vanished into the gloom of the black forest. I clenched my fist. The portal snapped shut, sealing the wound in the world. They were gone. The silence that returned to the arena was heavy, pregnant with fear and awe. I turned slowly to face the court. My father was shaking in the third row. The nobles who had sneered at me were bowing so low their foreheads touched the dirt. The royal guards dropped to one knee, lowering their weapons in a unified clash of steel. I walked past the shivering human form of Magnus and climbed the stairs to the iron throne. It was cold and uncomfortable, built for a tyrant, but as I sat down, the shadows rushed to cushion the metal, turning the seat of oppression into a throne of night. I looked out over the sea of bowed heads. I had entered this arena as a rejected rogue, a ghost story come to life. I sat now as the undeniable ruler of the 7 packs. The violet fire in my eyes burned bright, a beacon warning anyone who dared to challenge the new order. "Rise," I commanded, my voice echoing like thunder. "The reign of the sun is over." They rose, 10,000 wolves looking up at me with a mixture of terror and reverence. I leaned back, resting my hand on the head of my shadow beast, and smiled. It wasn't a warm smile. It was the smile of the storm that had finally broken the world. I was Seraphina no more. I was Rhea, the Eclipse, the judge, the queen. And the long night had only just begun. Wow, family, I honestly have goosebumps right now. That was, hands down, one of the most satisfying revenge arcs we have ever covered on this channel. The way she looked Ryker in the eye and told him, "Survive." Absolute chills. If you enjoyed seeing Rhea claim her throne and serve that ice-cold justice to Ivy and Ryker, do me a huge favor and smash that like button right now. It helps the channel so much and tells YouTube you want more powerful female leads like this. And if you haven't joined the pack yet, what are you waiting for? Hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell so you never miss an upload. We are posting heaters like this every single day here at Storm's Werewolf Romance Library, and you do not want to be left out of the conversation. I want to hear from you in the comments section. First, rep your city. Let me know exactly where you are listening from, whether you're tuning in from Lagos, New York, London, or anywhere in between.
I love seeing how global our family is. And second, tell me, what was your favorite moment in this story? Was it when she made Ivy kneel in the arena? Or was it when she ripped the spirit out of the king? Let me know down below. I'll be in the comments reading and hearting your replies. Thank you so much for spending your time with me today. Stay safe, stay strong, and I will see you in the next story.